If you're looking for a peek behind the curtain from somebody that works in UX and big tech, you are in the right place. This is a video that's going to show you the frameworks that I use at work, how I organize feedback, and other frameworks that I use on a really regular basis. So this is a lightning lesson that I did this past November, and so I would definitely welcome your comments, and I hope that you want to check out more at erinnessex.com. All right, feel free to drop those in at any time. I'm going to go ahead and get started. All right, so you are here today to learn more about what you can do within Figma. And the surprise here, maybe to some of you, is that Figma just doesn't just have to be for mockups and prototypes. It can be the area where you make decisions happen and especially keep track of them. And so, hey, if we haven't met before, my name's Erin Essex. I have a psychology degree, and but as far as UX is concerned, I'm all self-taught. I've worked in agencies and startups, as well as other large companies, such as the ones listed here. And I'm currently focused within YouTube, especially YouTube ads. And I've also been teaching UX since 2020 and doing a lot of other things on the side as well, which I'll share with you a little bit later in the presentation. But let me show you a little bit of our agenda today. And so I'm going to show you some frameworks around decision making. Then I will show you some things that I do for feedback management, which is something that we actually have to do quite frequently as designers. And then we'll have some time for Q&A as well. Throughout the presentation, I'm going to, call out to you all to drop things in the chat. So be ready for that. And it's good to see we have some tenured designers in here. Cool. And a couple 3 years and about a year, 2 years. Awesome. Great. Thanks for sharing your experience in there. Okay, before I get into it, I just want to note quickly that the processes and frameworks I'm going to show you are my personal practices that I've been doing. One of them I've been doing for about 10 years now. And so what I'm going to show you here doesn't necessarily reflect what Google is doing, but a lot of the designers that I work with are doing very similar things. So it's definitely a good peek behind the curtain of what's happening. Okay, so this is one of those slides. Why decisions stall, especially for my UX designers, but also for the project managers and product managers. Why do decisions stall? If you relate to what I'm about to say, please drop an emoji in the chat or maybe drop what your biggest challenge is. But one of my biggest challenges on why things stall is oftentimes I'll have stakeholders, they'll default to I like statements, like I really like this direction or I really like the way this looks, when that might not be very actionable for us. And so we need to figure out what's right for the product or the user, and not necessarily, around those kinds of statements. So that can actually take up a lot of time. The other thing too that I think I see a lot is that teams tend to struggle with weighing importance and urgency versus effort, right? And so we can underestimate the amount of effort that's required. And these things sometimes are done in silos, and they really should be done as a team, and it just really can drag out the process. Yeah, everyone getting on the same page for pros and cons. Yeah. Wow. And then lastly, what can make things stall is design history can get lost. If you work at a large company like I do, it can sometimes take a year for something to really ship. So you need to have a really good design history on decisions you made, because if you don't have it, sometimes you'll have to revisit those, your design rationale, and that can take up a lot of time. So having a great record is really important. And so by the end of this presentation, I'm going to share with you 4 frameworks that I use on a daily basis to help you create more clarity in your next project. So some context before I jump in. This will be shown in Figma. If you don't use Figma, that's totally fine. These frameworks you can use outside of Figma. I'm just showing you how they are in Figma, but just know this is still for you. And the other thing is that this is not my actual Google work. I cannot share that with you, but this is actually a project that I made like on the side just for fun. So that's the file I'll be using for this today. The other thing I'll share is that all of these slides and this file will be available to you at the end. So you can actually use this, make a copy of it, whatever you'd like to, and put this into your workflow. So that's my context there. All right, cool. So let's get into it. So the decision-making frameworks. So the scenario here is oftentimes at the very beginning of a project, or maybe the beginning of the year or a quarter, you'll have multiple project ideas and maybe limited resources, or you don't really know how to best prioritize them, right? And so drop in the chat or give me an emoji if you've heard of the Eisenhower matrix before. Certainly, if you follow me on TikTok, you see me talk about it a lot because I love an Eisenhower matrix. But we're going to talk about that here as far as impact versus effort. And you can drop some ideas into different sections. And this can be done individually or as a group. So I'll give you some examples around that. And the labels I'm creating here are just the labels I like to use. You can use whatever names that you would like as well. So let me show you a bit of what I'm talking about here. So within my demo file, you'll see that I have some projects here on the left, and then I have a prioritization matrix on the top and a cover. I'm not going to show you how to go like I set up files, but this is at least a little bit of a glimpse where I have every project has its own page, and then I have like maybe for the whole quarter or something on top. So in this case, prioritization matrix, I have a demo here of just like 6 features maybe that we're thinking about for the quarter that we need to discuss as a group. And so maybe we have an automation feature. This means that it is like an AI feature that we're trying to include. Maybe there's an enhancement to our mobile app that we want. Maybe there's an entry point that we want to put within our application. An entry point is just a button that maybe opens your product inside the experience. And so you can see here that there is this impact versus effort kind of grading that we're doing. And this is 1 through 10. So for impact, I'm mostly thinking about the impact to the users and the business. And you can separate these, but I like to keep them together for simplicity. And so we're thinking about that as far as like if it's a 10, then it's like hugely impactful for users. They've always wanted it, and we're going to make money off it, whatever the case is, however you measure that. And then effort, we're thinking about, mostly I'm thinking about engineering effort because there's a lot of like backend or APIs or things that we need to think of. But it could also be friction for approvals if you're doing something kind of that isn't an approved pattern, or just UX in general. And so 10 would be it's a ton of effort, and 1 would be it's super simple. So you can see here as a group, maybe we went through and thought, okay, automation, that's going to have a huge impact for our customers and going to be really freaking cool, but the effort is going to be high. So we'll need to think about that. And then maybe there's a lighter one like this entry points one where there is, it's a high impact to our users because they'll be able to find our product, and it's a lower effort because it's just a freaking button that we have to put in. And so what I would do once we have all the grades in there is just go through and start to plot them. So for number 1, it's an impact of an 8. So I'd go here and just kind of eyeball where an 8 would be for impact, and then it's an 8 for effort. So dropping it over there, right? The other example I used for entry points is number 4, and that was like an 8 for effort and like an 8 for impact and like a 2 for effort. So that would drop right there. And so you do that for each of these, and eventually you would end up with a chart that looks a little bit like this. Now, this can be really helpful in weighing decisions that you want to think about as a team. Maybe I could use this to say, okay, items number 3 and 4 are pretty high impact and low effort. So let's get that done. I will try to get those through approvals soon. Whereas our automation one is really important, as we can see from the impact, but it just requires more discussion. So this is an excellent way to figure out how to talk to your team about things that maybe require a little bit more discussion. And so these can be just better informed decisions. One of the things I find that interesting is that the placement of the dot is a huge debate for teams. And so the example I have there is we'll sometimes have an idea where product will say, there's no way that takes a lot of effort. It's already existing pattern. It's over here for effort. But then our engineer will say, well, actually, our backend doesn't support that. And so we have to do all this work in order. So they'll debate putting this dot over here. And these are really valuable discussions that we're having as a team that otherwise we wouldn't have because we don't have a visual to react to. And teams just usually figure out the best way to use this type of tool. So I tend to use it at the beginning of projects, like I said, or you can use it after you have a summit, or maybe after you do some user research to try to prioritize the order of the projects that you're looking at. Now, as I said, I'm a huge fan of this, so I use it outside of work too. I actually use prioritization matrices for all of my personal stuff. And so this is maybe a little bit vulnerable, but showing you like how I use it for my teaching things or organizing my travel or doing my taxes. But this is just showing you like this really helps me figure out, okay, I know to do these two things today. I'm going to put them on my calendar and make sure to get them done. The next day I'll come in and circle more things to do. So I find this really an effective way to organize my work. The other thing too, I said, if you had seen the TikTok about this, I really am obsessed with matrices. And so I'm showing here just a little bit of a more like complex way to do it, which could be through a spreadsheet. So that was matrices. So that was the heavy one. But the next one I want to share with you is, what if we had a scenario where there were 3 design solutions for one problem, but one of the ideas is clearly better, but maybe we have a hard time convincing one of our stakeholders that it's better. And so what I like to do is place the 3 different types of things that we're looking at all together, which you're probably already doing as UX designers, but I like to take it a step further by putting in these little mini charts that show all the trade-offs that we have right next to each other. And so what this ends up looking like is, in my file here, I have my working section, and then I have the different options that I'm looking at and the different trade-offs. And so, maybe for option A, we're delivering great value to our users. The business value is good. We'll make money off of it or decrease churn, whatever your metric is. But the complexity is like crazy, crazy complex, right? The engineers are a little bit scared, right? And so this could work, but it might take us a long time. Whereas maybe option B, where I made a slight change in the UI, is like a little less complex, but still gets us over the line for user value and business. And then what if there was a third version that offers like really little user value, but like could create a lot of business, but isn't necessarily maybe the best solution? And so I oftentimes will have somebody advocating for a quick fix solution, but it isn't good for users. And so this could be a way to visually show that to our stakeholders that we're working with. The other thing I'll do too is I will actually take advantage of this being a thing and drop what is UX preferred on my preferred option. And this usually just creates some discussion as well, and helps people understand where my head's at, or if they want to push back, they can see immediately where my thoughts are. Yeah, glad you love it. I hope it's effective. So that is one of the things that I'm doing there. So as far as some stories there that I'll share with you. I was using this technique when I was initially working on Google Ads, and we had a solution that we had to put in place. It was urgent, but it might mess up a user's setting, right? And so from a business standpoint, they're like, it messes up the setting, but maybe they'll get upset, maybe they won't, but we need to put this through. And for me, trying to protect users, I said, well, this is really going to upset users, and it could potentially be problematic down the road. And so I was able to use a chart like this to explain my points. The cool thing about this is people weighed in, and I also used emojis to show the amount of rage that it might create. And it was very helpful in convincing folks, but especially my legal team. Having that visual really helped the legal team understand the risk that maybe we could be taking by not informing users. So as you can see here, this fosters rich discussion, and it's surprisingly effective. I actually got promoted one time from doing this technique because people hadn't seen it before. And it really helps visualize the trade-offs. The other thing it can do is it can showcase an MVP versus a potential future release. So for instance, maybe option B is best for our MVP since it's fast to get out, but option A is the better solution, so we can work towards this maybe next year or in the next quarter. And yeah, this is powerful for demonstrating UX preferences because you just plop the little label on there and creates discussion, which is fun. Okay, so I'm going to get into managing feedback. So this is a heavy one. But the scenario here is keeping track of all your decisions in history can be, yeah, it's a lot, especially because some of my projects, like I said, can take a year to fully get across the line. So I do track feedback on absolutely everything that is said, uh, just because I want it to be available to everybody and searchable. And so there's a table of information that I provide, and everything like kind of has a link out, or there's a visual that represents what we're talking about. So what that looks like in practice is I have this little feedback tracker here on the left. my file is visible to absolutely everyone on my team, so everybody has access to this. And if I just had a meeting, let's say I had an approval meeting for this, I can write down what the stakeholders said, what changes they want to make, maybe a link to further notes, and I can keep track of, did I complete this or not? This can be great if you get a ton of feedback and you just need a checklist to hold yourself accountable. Because you wrote it on a post-it, but it's better to keep track of it here. The other thing that I like to do is add in like image examples. So it will be maybe design system components that they want me to try to use, those types of things. And I'll also keep track of when I talk to engineering to understand trade-offs. And so I can share that with other folks as well. So a great example of how this has been helpful is this is like radical transparency. A lot of designers do this, but some don't. And so it's really appreciated when somebody says, hey, did you talk to this person about that? And I can, do a quick search, be like, yep, back in August, I spoke to them about that. Here's what they said. And here's a link to our notes about it. Also, this is nice because if you work with teams in India or Europe or in California, as I do, this makes it available to them to like 24 hours a day, so I don't have to be there in order to answer their questions. So this can be a great way to keep yourself on track and keep others on track. So transparency is super valuable for your team and communication. It can be useful to have a record. Does anybody know what CYA means? If you drop me a thumbs up. But also documentation can be kept, not just if your team doesn't use Figma, you can also keep it in a ticket, which some teams do, or you can keep it in a presentation deck. And then I'd love to also see in the chat, like, how are you feeling about your decision making or your, tracking on your feedback now from scale of 1 to 10, 1 being kind of disorganized and 10 being I'm super organized, I got this. Would love to hear from you all. And to answer my own question, CYA, I use this quite a lot, and excuse me for the language, but it's cover your ass. This is a really important for cover your ass. So CYA, always thinking of how I can make sure that I didn't miss anything. Yeah, we got some 6s in there. Cool, cool, cool. Over time, things get messier. Yeah, I feel that. I feel that. Reacting to that. So sometimes it can be hard to stay on track of this stuff. I actually block time on my calendar on Fridays that is just calendar organization and feedback writing. And so I'll go through every written note that I have or go through my meeting notes and update this to make sure it's up to date for the week. So I hold myself accountable in that way. Sometimes feedback meetings are recorded, not always though, because people tend to be, I don't know, a little bit looser when they're not recorded, if I can say that. And so I kind of get more honest feedback, but a lot of times they are recorded, at least in more formal settings. And so because they're not recorded, how I'm keeping track is sometimes in these larger meetings, they will have somebody that's taking notes, but I will typically write notes by hand in the room, and I will reserve time after the meeting to type up my notes from that meeting because when it's fresh in my mind. So if you can get them to record, that's great. Okay, I'll answer that question there a little bit, which ones are worth implementing. So one other scenario I want to share with you all is there's always going to be somebody on your team, and maybe you relate to this. Somebody's going to always want to bring up an old solution that you've already decided doesn't work. And so this is where I think that the archive approach really works well. And so in this, I will label things like with the date and the version and the decision outcomes that happen. So you'll see how I structure my file here. And this is literally how I structure every file, even to the color background. I don't know why I'm like really into this teal right now. But you'll see everything that's on the left is always what I'm actively working on or active decision making. And then on the right is just the older it gets. So it's like chronological order, further to the left, or further to the right, the older this piece of feedback is or this decision is. And so you'll see here I have something from the summer, I have something from September, and I will label it as such. So with our active and our archive. So let's say, for instance, I had a huge change come in or maybe for the sake of this example, we decided to go with option B, and I just need to finalize my documentation for option B. So what I can do is just shift this over, pull in my new one, and then delete the screens that I don't need. And then I can get going here with my most recent version. So that's how I use the archive there. And so I like to think if I don't record why, I'll always end up redebating something later, which can be a little annoying and a time suck, as we were saying. And so this provides necessary history of the reminder of everything that you've done and explorations. It enables a team member that maybe starts your team midway through a project to quickly understand how the project has evolved over time. And this is a great way for stakeholders to recall prior decisions or things that we discussed because they have a lot going on. And so they might not always remember exactly what the discussion was. And so having it there is important. A quick story about archiving. So actually, what was it, yesterday? I found it really useful to have my archived file because somebody brought up like, hey, did you ever do a version of multi-select for this particular feature? And I did, but it wasn't possible. But guess what? They made a change to the design system and suddenly it was possible. And so I was able to go into one of my old archive files, pull that frame out, and then start over and actually clean up that file. And so that was really helpful starting point. Didn't have to start from scratch. And it was a really great way to, pick up that old work. That was really helpful. And this can also be a great way to keep track of less effective ideas that can come up frequently. I'll always have some solution that people think is simple or think is great for the user, but it just doesn't work. And so this is a great place to put that. So if somebody is like, hey, did you explore that? Yep, I did. Here it is. You can visually now see why it doesn't work. I often find that a lot of non-designer stakeholders have a hard time visualizing why things don't work for users. And so having this representation here is really critical for getting them on board quickly. And then you can get back to work, right? All right, so key takeaways here, visualizing trade-offs will lead to faster and fairer decisions that are made. Making decisions visible are really important for better alignment, and tracking and archiving feedback creates institutional memory and also helps you. I have memory issues, so this helps me a lot, but really helps people, just jump into your file and find answers that they need right away. And so one point I want to make here is that if you only remember one slide, UX isn't just for the product that you're working on or the project you're working on. I like to think of UX as the user experience of working with me. What is my process, and how do I make it as easy as possible for you to work with me, and we can visualize things together. So we're going to jump into Q&A in a moment. And I will get to the question that is in the chat there first, but please think of more and drop them in. I also want to just quickly plug, we do have some classes coming up. It seems like some of y'all might already know Figma, but if you don't, we have a crash course coming up in December, so you can learn Figma before the holidays. If you're already good on Figma and you are trying to figure out how to use these AI tools that are coming out, including Figma Make, maybe AI Studio, we have a class coming up in January that'll be all about that for doing AI within Figma and in your UX process. And then I also offer coaching sessions. And so you can find out more about that on my website as well. Now, I mentioned that you can get the slides and the Figma file, and you can do that right on erinnessex.com/resources. You'll see it there. It'll be on the top left position. So with that, I'll jump into at least the first question I see here. And this is about how do you decide which pieces of feedback are worth implementing? That's good. I left that one out. There are some times where I will get feedback from somebody that I really don't agree with. And so what I can do here is I will sometimes note, like not integrated. And this will be great because I will note why it's there, and then I will expand on this further or link to an explanation on why I didn't do it. And then the next time I talk to that person, I can explain why I didn't integrate their feedback, or typically I will ping them on the side and say, hey, I appreciated this feedback, but it didn't work for X, Y, and Z reason. Are you, do you want to push back against that? Do you have any other suggestions? And then typically after we have that quick side chat, I will also note the chat in here, not copy pasting because we're, respecting people's privacy, but just, hey, I chatted with Tim about this piece of feedback. We are okay rolling with the margins as is. And so that is how I would handle different types of feedback not worth implementing. And there's a question about throwing the slides in the chat. I will do that right now. Oh, well, thank you. Got ahead of me there. Love that. Other questions, like things that jumped out to you all. What do you think is useful? What do you think you want to try? Yeah, sliding scale. Yeah, that sliding scale visual or the uh, the emojis, as much as you can use emojis and still be respected. I don't know. I feel like people like them. That was just like a great emotional way to show the trade-offs. So I'm glad that resonated with you. How do you determine the right level of complexity when presenting design options? Do you decide this with engineering? That's a great question, Peggy. So level of complexity, I'm going to be honest with you. There's a project that I'm working on now. I'll just do it up here. The level of complexity that I did was this. And then I'm like, essentially, I was trying to talk about different ways or places for the button and how it would essentially interact with other things on the page. And so we were looking at the button placement there. We were looking at the button placement top right. And so sometimes this is the level of fidelity that I will talk to engineering about or with. And the thing that I love about engineers is I can make something like this and they will immediately understand what I'm talking. It's maybe there's a few more boxes on here, but it's a very simple kind of approach. Whereas if I maybe gave this to like, I love my product partners, but sometimes I will show them this and they won't understand what this means. And so I'll need to give them a little bit higher fidelity and complexity. And so typically I try to have meetings with engineering and product at the same time because we work as a three-legged stool. We all work together when we are equal. But because of the time zones, as I mentioned, that can be hard. And so I'll oftentimes have a quick chat with engineering, and then I will go to product, being even keel. We didn't make any decisions without you. Here's what we discussed. Here's the recommendation, and go from there. So yeah. Oh, I get a lot of, I love this. I get into a lot of debates with stakeholders who can't visualize. Yeah, it's hard. And I will tell you, when I find that I have a stakeholder that has a hard time visualizing, they have other strengths, just we're great at picking apart pieces from air and just visualizing it in our brain. I will sometimes just spend extra time making them an interactive prototype. Fortunately, we can vibe code now, so you can actually vibe code a solution to help one of those stakeholders. But yeah, sometimes you have to get into different levels of fidelity with stakeholders. And then Lola here, I liked the matrix, as well as how one can use it on your personal life. Yeah. I can't live without a matrix. I actually have a time block on my calendar after this to make a matrix for all the stuff I need to do this weekend. So I'm glad that resonated with you. I do have a free resource on my website as well, if you want to use the spreadsheet version. But as you can see, I was just using my iPad, or you can just use a piece of paper, or you can cut out the little dots, whatever you want to do. So I find it really useful. Another question here. How do you respond if someone challenges the product design decision after you show them the data, rationale, and decision on why it was made? It happens so first, usually if there is data or rationale why a decision is maybe not great, typically a person will back down or they'll try to give like other reasons or rational things that you should maybe consider. So I find that this creates really good conversation. Sometimes you just have a decision maker that it's just not going to happen. And I've had that happen to me too. It happens to all of us. And so you have to do your best to stand up for what's best for the user and the product from your perspective, but sometimes you have to concede to what somebody higher up than you is pushing towards. So yeah, I try to fight back as much as possible. But if I lose the fight,
Like, let's say we're going with this guy that's like great for business, but users, it's terrible for them. I will write down why I think this is like in nice terms, why I think this isn't the best decision and what we should explore in the future. I will explain to my UX stakeholders who are going to be like, Erin, why are you doing this? I will explain what this person's decision, their rationale behind it, and my plan to follow up on this in the future once we get data back when it goes live, if it's going poorly, which typically it does. And so that's how I would approach that. Do you organize or label your archive designs in a specific way to make them easier to find later? So the archive designs, I work really fast. So I know like if you take my UX class, I'm going to tell you to name your layers and stuff, but I don't a lot of the time. Uh, so I work really fast, so I don't really obsess too much about the labeling. So you can see what I'll do is just whatever month it is that I'm archiving, I will just dump everything under it. In real life, if this was a real file, I would also have a bunch of like random stuff that I put down here, screenshots, maybe like a component that I made. I will put everything on there. So it's not necessarily organized in a super specific way because I don't want to spend a lot of time doing that. But just knowing that all of this stuff is from September is what I need to know. So that's the level of organization I need. I do know other designers that prefer to make different Figma pages for their archive, which if you prefer doing it that way to keep your file cleaner, that's totally understandable. I like doing it this way because one, it keeps one project in one place and I don't have a ton of pages. But two, I will often be working on something and be like, ah, crap, where's that component? And I can search for it in my component library, but most of the time I can just scroll over and like be like, oh, there that guy is and pull it over. So I kind of can use it as a Frankenstein farm too. Yeah, I'm glad it was helpful. Cool. Well, with that, yeah, I will start to close. I want to drop one more thing in the link, or sorry, in the chat here around the courses that are coming up, as well as the coaching if you're interested in that. And we have some other speaking events, so I hope that you follow me on the socials or on LinkedIn, and I will keep you up to date. And if there's something that you'd like to chat with me about, please feel free to send me a note. I'm always available on LinkedIn or through the website. So I'm glad this was helpful to you all. Thank you so much for coming today. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for watching, and I hope that you want to give me a follow on all of the socials. And for more information, please check out erinnessex.com.